We don't have outbreaks where chickens are dying from coccidiosis. Why not? Well, because we're using either what we call chemoprophylaxis, which is drugs in the feed, whether they're synthetic anticoccidials or ionophores, or we're using what we call immunoprophylaxis, which means we vaccinate the birds and hope to get them immunized.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Poultry Podcast. My name is Jason Emmert, and I'm excited to be joined today by Dr. Hector Cervantes, who is an adjunct graduate professor in the College of Veterinary Medicine in the Department of Animal Health at the University of Georgia. He's worked for Phibro Animal Health, serving as the Senior Manager of Poultry Veterinary Services for the North American region, and has been active in the poultry industry for, I believe, over 30 years. Dr. Cervantes has been very supportive of industry organizations, previously serving as president of the American Association of Avian Pathologists, the Southern Poultry Science Society, and the American College of Poultry Veterinarians. And he has received many awards, including two I would like to mention. The Lamplighter Award from the U.S. Poultry and Egg Association, awarded earlier this year, and induction into the Latin American Hall of Fame by the Latin American Poultry Industry Association in 2017. Dr. Cervantes, it's an honor to welcome you to the podcast.
Thank you, Doctor. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. Now, it would be foolish to have a conversation with you without discussing coccidiosis. So we'll focus on that. But I'm sure we'll touch on some other things as well. But if you don't mind, to get us started, could you tell us a bit more about your background, your career, and in particular, how you came to develop expertise in this area of coccidiosis?
Sure, I'll be happy to do that. I first came to the United States, to the University of Georgia, to pursue a master's degree in the Poultry Science Department. I completed my master's degree, went back to work in Mexico for Ralston Purina for a couple of years in the technical service area. And then, my wife had some family issues with her mother. We moved back to the U.S. back in 1983, if I remember correctly, and took a job. My first industry job was with Cargill as a turkey production veterinarian. From there, I went to Pearson Farms, where I was director of health for the broiler division and the primary breeders. And from there, I took a job with Pfizer. At the time, it was Pfizer. To move back to Georgia, where our family lived. So I've been here ever since 1995. In 2000, Phibro acquired the feed additive business from Pfizer, and that's how I ended up with Phibro. And I was between Pfizer and Phibro, I was 27 years with the company, and doing primarily coccidiosis research and field work with customers in the United States. 10 years I covered Canada, Mexico, and the United States. So I have plenty of opportunity to get out and see different operations in different countries, but primarily working on coccidiosis issues.
Absolutely.
One thing I want to mention is that I'm most proud of is that I was able to validate my degree in the United States. So I have a full license to practice here, in spite of having graduated for a non-accredited university at the time. UNAM is now fully accredited, but that didn't happen until about 3 years after I graduated. So I had to go through the examinations procedure, and very proud that I succeeded and got a full license to practice.
Working with nature and not against it. Chickens fed AX3 Digest consume significantly less feed and water to produce 1 pound of meat. Successful flock performance is determined during the first 10 days post-placement. AX3 Digest is a highly digestible novel protein that most improved in barn performance, bird health, and a drier litter. For more information, visit www.protecta.com.
Very good. Very good. Well, we're happy too, because that's led to some very important things here. I think it's really interesting that you've had the chance, and I think quite a few people that work in North America do, but the chance to see the industry, Latin America, the U.S., in Canada, different industries, but I'm sure lots of similarities as well. So I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add about that.
Well, it's very, very interesting you mentioned, because there are some significant differences. That the thing they have in common, of course, they're producing high quality protein to feed the world. That's in common for all of them, and they're all having to deal with health issues in their flocks at some point or another. But there are some striking differences. For example, Mexico, the market is pretty much 100% for highly pigmented bird. So the birds are, I tell the students, they're not yellow, they're orange, because we used to mix red and yellow pigments to get that orange color. So it's a very distinct difference. And coccidiosis is extremely important, because the first thing that is impacted is absorption, intestinal absorption, and especially pigments. So the first thing you're going to see in a flock impacted by coccidiosis is a change in pigmentation, which the Mexican market is extremely sensitive to it. Canada, the difference there is that it's a quota market, so the producers cannot. The government says how many chickens are going to be placed this year and how many breeders will be bought and all of that. So, and it's not integrated like the United States or Mexico. The big integrators like Bachoco in Mexico, fully integrated, just like Tyson or Pilgrims here. So the Canadian system is, they have people that sells baby chicks and people that sells feed to the producers, and another company buys the chickens for processing. So it's those are the main differences. But coccidiosis is coccidiosis, and the coccidia behave the same way. Their life cycle is the same, whether it's Mexico, Canada, or the United States.
Absolutely. You have biology and you have economics, and they can, biology is pretty consistent. Economics, not so much. Yeah.
But they're all out there trying to make a profit. So that's where coccidiosis come into the picture.
You bet. I'm sure, though, the structure of the industry can greatly impact the decisions people make and how they approach prevention, how they approach treatment. It certainly would affect those things, I'm sure.
Very true, because, for example, as you well know, in Canada and Mexico, after each flock, the houses are completely emptied, cleaned out, disinfected. In Canada, a lot of them have concrete floors that you can clean, wash, disinfect, and bring new litter. And this happens after every placement. In Mexico, it's the same way. Whereas in the United States, we use a system where we reuse the litter, built-up litter. And that's actually turned out to be a pretty good system for the United States, very economical and good for the chickens in the long term. Believe it or not, used litter has been determined to lessen the risk of having necrotic enteritis, for example, or a coccidiosis outbreak, for that matter. Some of the worst coccidiosis outbreaks are called the so-called new house syndrome, or the houses where there's no challenge at all, and all of a sudden they get exposed and have a major outbreak. Very, very unique, distinct differences. Of course, Mexico is moving more towards the tunnel ventilated houses like in the United States, but they're not as along as the United States. And of course, Canada is all enclosed because of the weather. But so there are some management differences, but in the end, all are trying to control coccidiosis. Mexico, like I said, pigmentation is so important that they routinely conduct oocyst counts from the litter at various intervals, and they do it for every house, for every flock, every week. And a lot of times they make a decision to treat based on oocyst count. They don't wait. They see, if we wait till we see lesions, we're already too late. We already lost the game. So those are striking differences.
Absolutely. And it sounds like with the different kind of production realities, it makes it all that much more important to truly understand mechanisms and how coccidiosis works, and the biology of it, because that is consistent across systems. But yeah, having that basic understanding is absolutely crucial if you're going to know how to prevent and respond, no matter what the production system is.
Absolutely. And of course, as you know, there are also big differences because in Canada, for example, the veterinarians have, licensed veterinarians have more latitude. They can prescribe things in feed, which we cannot do in the United States. They can change dosages. They have a flexible dosing for licensed veterinarians, so they can use higher levels of a particular drug. They may check with Farad and determine, maybe add a couple of days to the withdrawal period or something like that. But they have a lot more flexibility. In the U.S., there's no extra label drug use in feed, period. Mexico, the same way, they have a lot more flexibility for that. So that impacts coccidiosis control. Of course, the other main difference in the United States is that um, there's been a growing market for so-called birds raised without antibiotics, okay, or ABF, or they call it NAE, no antibiotics ever, uh, without antibiotics, RWA. And that had created a lot of issues for preventing coccidiosis, because basically ionophores, ionophore anticoccidials, have been the backbone of coccidiosis prevention worldwide for many years. Ever since monensin was introduced into the market back in 1971. Look at that. It's 1971. Here we are in 2020. 21 was how many years? 60 years. And we're still using monensin successfully in both chickens and turkeys. So when you take that tool away by going antibiotic free, in the United States, ionophore anticoccidials are considered antibiotics, unlike the European Union. The European Union allows use of ionophores because, truly speaking, they're not used for growth promotion. They are used to prevent coccidiosis, which of course results in better growth. But they have no use whatsoever in human medicine. They're highly toxic. So they're never going to be used in human medicine. There's no cross resistance issues. So they're allowed to be used. Whereas in the United States, we took a stance, or the FDA took a stance, that they're antimicrobials and therefore cannot be used in production such as NAE or RWA. And that a lot of issues with coccidiosis, because that means to prevent coccidiosis, you can only use two things: synthetic or chemically synthesized anticoccidials, such as nicarbazine, zoline, clopidol, amprolium, etc., or vaccines, live coccidiosis vaccines. But even though the vaccines can be very effective when a full protective dose is administered to each and every chicken, the reality is, because we spray them in a cabinet at the hatchery, is a spray vaccination. It is extremely difficult to get 100% full coverage for every baby chick, and that has created issues in the field with excessive consumption of ooses from birds that are naive because they missed the vaccination at the hatchery, but they pick it up from litter later on. That can result on issues in the field, such as necrotic enteritis. And so those are big differences between Canada, Mexico, and the U.S.
Absolutely. And it seems like a rare situation where there's greater latitude in the EU than we have here with regard to, prevention strategies.
Yes, I have a good friend that made a funny statement, but very true. He says, "Well, now we're preaching Catholicism to the Pope," in the U.S.
Right.
Because that gone beyond. I mean, they're the ones that started this movement, and now we've taken even a more drastic approach that is really cannot tie in our hands as far as coccidiosis control. And I'm sure you heard recently Tyson, the big integrator in the United States, has changed their views on ionophores and have started talking about another label, like no antibiotics of human importance, no antibiotics raised with no antibiotics of human importance, NAHI, which is a very good move in my opinion, because that opens the door to go back and start using ionophores, which, like I said, have been the backbone of coccidiosis prevention worldwide. And that doesn't mean you cannot use vaccines. The vaccines have a place, of course, in the rotations. It's always good to reseed the houses with sensitive strains of coccidia and give all the drugs a rest. But it's also important to have more tools at our disposal. We have the 5 ionophore anticoccidials that can be used in chickens and 2 in turkeys. We should take advantage of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thinking of the spray vaccines, it makes me think of how difficult it is to get a group of adults to stand still for a picture and everybody line up where you want them. A group of chicks in a box to get them to spread out and take this vaccine. Yeah, impossible.
That's a very good analogy and very true. It's just that's our biggest area of opportunity, as I see it at the hatchery, is in finding a method where we could administer a full protective dose of vaccine to each and every chick. If we could do that, and I know there's companies working as we speak on just doing that, where they could actually administer the dose directly to each baby chick. If we get to that point, that would be a game changer.
Absolutely. So you mentioned that's a pressing issue at the hatchery. What do you see as maybe the top concern? And maybe if we focus on the U.S. poultry industry for a minute, when you think about coccidiosis, what now is the most pressing concern that you would have?
Well, the pressing concern, there are several. Okay, one is, like I mentioned before, going in these programs where antibiotics like ionophores are not allowed in the program. Puts a lot of pressure on the chemically synthesized anticoccidials, and those have been around for more than 50 years, most of them. And relying on 7 anticoccidials to go in. The problem with the synthetic anticoccidials is that, uh, especially the most potent or more effective ones, tend to put selective pressure and select for strains of coccidia that become resistant. So you cannot be on one of them, indefinitely. You have to be rotating. There is a limited number of drugs that can be used, and some of them cannot be used year round. Like nicarbazine is very effective, but it has some issues during hot weather. So it is recommended not to be used during hot weather. So that again, it's your options. So that is one of the biggest issues I see. The other, of course, is if we could get the vaccines to find a way to administer the dose to each baby chick. Again, it'd be a big game changer. Um, but I am glad to see the move by one of our largest integrators to begin allowing use of ionophores again in their programs, and have more options to prevent coccidiosis, because basically we don't have any new products. Basically, the last chemical approved or synthetic anticoccidial approved in the United States was 1999. Some others have been around since 1955. I mean, in 1955, 1999 was the last one. The ionophores, Monensi, in 1971, and some of the latest ones, like semduramycin, it was 1994, 1994. So we have products that have a lot of mileage already. And because of the expense, another big problem I see is the expense that is involved bringing a new FDA approved product to the marketplace. I was reading some of the old papers by Dr. Reed, and he was talking is now it's expensive. A company may spend up to $30 million, to bring a new drug. That was in 1960. Do you know how much it is now? I talked to Dr. McDougall. He says there's not going to be any new ones. Bringing a new product is going to be costing around $500 million. Company, no pharmaceutical company that is going to touch that anywhere in Europe or the United States or any other developed country. And that's why you don't see any, there's nothing in the pipeline as far as FDA approved products. There's a lot of alternative products, but not FDA approved products.
Right. The financial risk is enormous. I mean, not manageable. Yep.
Is
Yeah.
is just incredible. So that's why I keep telling our customers and producers that we need to manage these tools in a very rational way with very good scientific basis, including how these products work, mode of action. So we rotate among different modes of actions. We use the vaccines to reseed the houses with sensitive strains. We improve management of the houses to make sure if they're vaccinated, maybe they need to be managed a little different, so that we get good immunity development against coccidiosis in the long term, because we're not going to have any new product. We're going to have to depend on the same 7 chemicals we've had for a long time and the same 5 ionophores we've had for a long time.
Right. And it sounds like this is definitely an area where, for anyone working in production or having anything to do with bird health, you really need to have an understanding of all the available products, the advantages, the disadvantages, the timing, so that you can mix and match to the best of your ability. Can't just have one favorite and stick with that.
No. We saw that happen with selenomycin years ago when it became so cheap, because there was 2 companies fighting it out for market share. Brought the price down from, I don't know what it was, $4.50 or $5.50 a ton to less than $2. And everybody was on that product, and it's a great product. You shouldn't stay on it for years at a time. So we run into issues of less effectiveness due to how long they stayed on it. And talking about resistance, another area of opportunity that I see for many companies, especially those that are exclusively using synthetic anticoccidials for the NAE programs. Some of them are comfortable using vaccines and chemicals. Some are comfortable only using synthetic anticoccidials, and some are comfortable only using vaccines. But most of them use synthetic anticoccidials at some point. And for those, we always recommend they conduct routine anticoccidial sensitivity testing, which means they collect samples from their own litter from 10 different flocks. They're submitted to a laboratory qualified to do these testing. There are several. And the isolates from these samples are tested for sensitivity against different anticoccidials. And it can be synthetics and it can be ionophores. And we can argue that is an unfair comparison of synthetics versus ionophores on a 6 or 7 day test. But you can compare, let's say, just compare your chemicals against your chemicals and your ionophores against your ionophores. But it is, I think, important these days to have a baseline to know, okay, this is where I was as far as sensitivity to nicarbazine or zoline or monensin, and this is where I am a year later. I think if you build a once per year, you can have a very useful tool. Remember, we don't have antibiograms like we do for sensitivity against E. coli or some other bacteria. We're dealing with coccidia. So the coccidial sensitivity test is the best we have at this point. There have been great advances in molecular techniques, but as far as I know, we don't have a practical molecular test that we can take to the field to say, okay, I'm going to test sample from this litter and it's going to tell me the coccidia are sensitive to these and resistant to that. We don't have that. Fortunately, we have run an in vivo test with live chickens, and that takes some time. That's what I also tell if you want to do that, just plan ahead of time, know when to collect your samples, and be expecting 10 to 12 weeks before you get results, because you have you have to have the drugs, you have to order chicks, you have to grow the chicks to at least 2 weeks. Then you have to challenge. Then you got to 6 days later score the lesions, and then summarize all the data, analyze all the data, produce a report. And so, in fact, it's unreal to expect the result in any sooner than, I'd say, 10, 12 weeks.
The next question I wanted to ask is, if you're looking at a production system, is there a particular situation you would call a perfect storm, that it looks like this is the worst case scenario as far as probably having a cocci outbreak?
Well, that's a good question. Usually, the problems with coccidiosis are related to, as you know, is a numbers game, basically. Too many ounces can overwhelm a chicken and even a drug, if the dose is high enough. So I would say where you have conditions where oocysts, obviously the oocysts are excreted and sporulated. To sporulate, they require temperature, oxygen, and those two are usually in the same range of the chicken. So that's going to be right there in the chicken house. The last and most important one is moisture. The amount of moisture in the litter is what's going to be critical. If it's not enough litter, if it's not enough moisture in that litter, the oocysts will not sporulate, which would be bad in the case of vaccines, because let's say at the beginning there's not enough moisture in let's say a pullet replacement roller breeder setup. There's not enough moisture early on, but the oocysts are there. They're just not sporulated. When the birds start growing and dumping more moisture on that litter and drinking more water and spilling more water, all of a sudden you get massive sporulation of oocysts, and a coccidiosis outbreak can occur. That's one example of a bad situation for not enough moisture. But the typical one is where you have leaky drinkers, uh, too much moisture, not enough ventilation in the house. So there's too much moisture and ammonia, etc. And those oocysts are sporulating very quickly, and the numbers are large enough to overwhelm any prevention program you might have. So I would say the perfect storm is where you have wet litter, and of course, if you have wet litter, usually going along with that is deficiencies in management, whether it's ventilation or something else. So you put stressor on top of stressor on those birds, and yes, you're asking for a perfect storm that can result in a coccidiosis, actually a clinical outbreak, or secondary infections later, like necrotic enteritis and so forth. But yes, um, there are conditions where there are more conducive to overwhelming the system and having coccidiosis. Now, having said clinical outbreak, I need to qualify that. Typically, in commercial production, we do not see clinical coccidiosis. Okay, we don't have outbreaks where chickens are dying from coccidiosis. Why not? Well, because we're using either what we call chemoprophylaxis, which is drugs in the feed, whether they're synthetic anticoccidials or ionophores, or we're using what we call immunoprophylaxis, which means we vaccinate the birds and hope to get them immunized. So we're not going to have typically clinical coccidiosis unless something like, okay, they left the drug out of the feed, they got feed without anticoccidial, or they run out of feed. Things like that obviously are going to cause secondary problems such as coccidiosis. But yes, I would say managing the litter moisture is probably one of the most important things you can do to aid drugs or vaccines in being successful as far as preventing outbreaks or of obviously of clinical, but the key is controlling subclinical infections, because coccidiosis, like I said, is not going to be a clinical problem. And subclinical infections are the most difficult to diagnose and treat and assess. Why? Because if you walk in a chicken house and you just walk through it, apparently the birds look normal. They're not sick, they're not dying, they don't have signs of disease. But if you take 5 birds at random, humanely euthanize them, and then examine their intestinal tract, oftentimes you find that several of those 5, maybe 2 or 3, will have mild, moderate, or moderate lesions, typical lesions of coccidiosis, which we know what they look like. In broiler chickens, there are 3 species. There are the big 3, A. cervillana in the upper small intestine, primarily the duodenum, Eimeria maxima in the mid-intestinal tract, and Eimeria tenella infecting the ceca. So you're going to find either typical lesions that you know what they are, or you can, in the case of maxima, because the lesions are not so distinct as A. cervillana and tenella, you always have to scrape the mid-intestinal tract, do a serial scraping of the mucosa of the mid-intestine, examine it microscopically, and look for the very unique large oocyst of Eimeria maxima. That's why it's called maxima. It produces the largest oocyst. Anybody can diagnose Eimeria maxima based on the oocyst size because it's the largest. So if you do that, oftentimes you find that there is coccidiosis there, which means there is a subclinical infection. Now, there is a difference between subclinical infection and coccidiasis. We used to call coccidiasis with an A, not with an O, an infection for a while. Some people get it confused. They say that's subclinical coccidiosis. No, that's not subclinical coccidiosis. It's been defined. Clinical, of course, you have symptoms of the disease, bloody, bloody feces or bloody excreta, sick birds that are your typical sick bird attitude. They're huddling and they're inactive and they just look sick. You got enteritis, you get mortality in the case of Tenella. So that's clinical. That's usually not the problem. Subclinical is what I described before, and that's why we do these so-called Cocci checks, or call them Cocci checks, or necropsy sessions, or broiler health surveys, or whatever you want to call them, where we bring 12, 14, 16 different flocks, 5 birds from 16 different flocks, and go through them in a postmortem examination to assess how well we're controlling coccidiosis, for example. So we're looking there for subclinical infections. Coccidiasis, on the other hand, so the subclinical infection doesn't have symptoms, the birds look normal, you can't tell, but when you do the postmortem, you find either the parasite or the lesions. And those infections are severe enough to be impacting performance. Usually, you lose a little bit of, you lose feed conversion, pigmentation, weight gain, but not to a point where you can tell they're sick. It's just they're below what it is. That's why it's called coccidiosis. It's called an embezzler. Is an embezzler. You don't realize that he's robbing you until you balance the books, and then you realize what happened here at the end when you settle the flock. That's what happened, but you don't know. So it's different from a thief that just comes and holds you up with a gun. That's different. That's the clinical outbreak. Coccidiasis, on the other hand, is an infection that is so mild that it doesn't have a measurable impact on performance. So we have three levels: clinical, subclinical, and coccidiasis. Coccidiasis is fine, but there's a, there's a fine line between those. The subclinical and coccidiasis can quickly turn into a subclinical infection if the management conditions are such, like I mentioned, like the litter starts getting too wet, the birds didn't develop immunity correctly because they weren't vaccinated properly, or because we skip a drug in the feed in one load, or something happened. It could be due to things like that.
Yeah, I love that analogy. That's a great example. The embezzler, and when for one bird, not that big a deal, but you multiply it by so many birds, so many houses, so many flocks, and my goodness, it adds up.
And if you look at the surveys of production veterinarians in the United States, they rank coccidiosis as the number one issue, maybe followed by necrotic enteritis, or sometimes I've seen even Eimeria maxima, which I say, well, that's one species of coccidia. So it's obviously remains a headache, and it's so funny because I go back and read. I read a lot of the old papers because you learn from history, not to repeat the same mistakes. You go back and you read. I was reading a paper from 1945, and it says coccidiosis is the biggest issue, just like it is today, and we still know so little about it, and we don't understand really. And I say I could open that a new presentation today and use that same statement because we're still got a lot to learn, in spite of what all the great things we've learned. There's a lot more to learn.
Yeah, and that's a great testament to why some of the older literature is so important. We can't disregard that.
We had some bright people doing some fantastic work years ago, and it was mostly here in the United States. And I always, when I lecture my students on coccidiosis, I always tell them, go back and read some of the classic work by some of the giants in this field. It's amazing what they did so many years ago. It's fascinating to go back and read it.
It is. And I think perhaps we're moving into an era of another educational opportunity. Um, if we're going to develop production systems that are in that line of no antibiotics of human importance, that gives us the opportunity to talk to the public about what that means and why that's important. And so hopefully we will embrace that opportunity and be able to help the public better understand the importance of control and the tools at our disposal.
I think it's our responsibility as professionals to educate the public, because I'm sure if you ask a housewife, what she thought of a label that says antibiotic free in a chicken supermarket, she probably thinks, well, that means the ones that are not antibiotic free have antibiotics in the meat. Well, that's not true at all. All meat is antibiotic free, or maybe residues so tiny that are below the tolerance allowed by FDA that are considered safe for human consumption. But probably the labels may be confusing some consumers anyway, to the point where they say, well, if this is antibiotic free, this means this one has antibiotics in it, or something like that.
It's time for our famous three. Natural Biologics is using cutting-edge science to dig deeper into the poultry health challenges you face. By gathering scientific evidence, they identify the most effective combinations of natural ingredients that improve animal health. Visit naturalbiologics.com/poultry to see the newest research in both turkeys and chickens.
Great. As we near the end of our time together, we have a couple questions we like to ask folks, and one of those is if you have any favorite poultry-related book or resource, anything that's just been really handy to you over the years.
Well, obviously, Diseases of Poultry textbook, uh, and not because we wrote the chapter on coccidiosis with Dr. McDougall and Dr. Jenkins, but just because it really has been a standalone textbook on avian diseases from the very beginning. It's funny. I remember being in vet school in Mexico and studying avian diseases in the Hofstad, as it was named back then, by the lead author, Dr. Hofstede from Iowa State University, from the vet school. And so it's been a standalone valuable. It's like the Bible for a poultry pathologist. So I would say that's my number one reference book as a veterinarian. I'm sure the nutritionists would have a different reference book of their preference, but certainly even this one covers nutritional deficiencies and things like that. So I would say that's been the most useful for me, and now it is available in digital form and in hard copy. So that's definitely been one. I never leave the house without it.
Yeah. And you mentioned, nutritionists may have a different one, but I'm starting to think we should all share these and have multiple types of resources at our disposal, because things aren't nearly as independent as I would have liked to have believed in grad school all those years ago. I'm a nutritionist. I'm not worried about disease. Well, they're not necessarily separate.
There, you're absolutely 100% right on that. And with this NAE, a lot of these issues have come to the surface that where we need to work in a team effort and bring expertise from all areas, the nutritionist, the veterinarian, and combine those efforts, the management experts, to make a program succeed, because it's a learning curve going into these different new programs.
Absolutely. Well, following up on the favorite poultry related resource, is there a favorite non-poultry related book or resource or activity? This is wide open.
Uh, okay. Well, actually, my hobby's been reading coccidiosis papers and textbooks and everything I can collect forever. But recently, I broke my own rule. My wife and I took a trip to Madrid with my last name, Cervantes, being such a well-known name and respected name in Spain. We decided to go and look for a little bit of where my name comes from. And of course, the Cervantes name is revered because Miguel de Cervantes de Saavedra, the famous writer, kind of the counterpart to Shakespeare in the English world. So I decided, well, I'm already here. I'm going to buy Don Quixote, uh, famous, famous book, and I'll tell you, I think I'm on page 899, and it's about 1100 or something like that. But I've enjoyed it tremendously. It's something different, and that I should have done a long time ago. So I recommend it. It's hard to read because it's old Spanish, but they said that after the Bible is the most translated book in the world to different languages, only second to the Bible. So I would say read Don Quixote and see if you can get some ideas for your own personal life.
Absolutely. And I would bet almost anything that it's better than the movie, the book.
I didn't see the movie, but I'm enjoying the book.
Very
That's
good.
for sure.
Yeah, very good. Well, the last question we have for you is if you would have any advice. Let's say we have young people wanting to get into the poultry industry or the poultry related world. You have industry and university experience. Would you have any advice for how to be successful kind of coming into and working in the poultry world?
Sure. Well, the first thing is you have to have a passion for what you like, for what you do, and what you like to do. So follow your heart, and in my case, University of Mexico, they preached to us back in those days about the importance of producing high quality protein for our people that make it more accessible, and and that's the reason I stayed in poultry even after I got my license. I said, no, I'm gonna help feed the world. And if you have a passion for what you do, you're going to be successful no matter what field you pick. Poultry has been a great experience for myself. I would not change a thing if I went back to vet school. I do exactly the same thing. It's given me an opportunity to see the world, to interact with meet so many wonderful people in our poultry industry. And I spend a lot of time with young people. I'm on 6 PhD committees here in the Department of Poultry Science, even though I'm retired. and I'm on another one at the College of Veterinary Medicine, and they're all bright, intelligent kids. It's a pleasure to work with them, and I always tell them, follow your heart, do what you do, pick an area that you want to develop expertise on, and then just be passionate about it. And get involved with the associations, the scientific associations from what you're studying from an early time, and before you know it, you're gonna be so many years in the industry, and all of a sudden you are elected president of this and president of that because they've seen all the years you spent putting your grain of salt to make that organization a success. So I would say be passionate and join as a member student, become active with the boards of directors, and the opportunities will open up because they're always there for the people that shows an interest.
That's great advice. Follow your passion, talk to people, network, contribute back. Just all great messages.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Give back. That's why
Yeah.
I do a lot of teaching as honorary member.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We sure appreciate your willingness to spend time and share your expertise on this very, very important topic. And we hope you have a great rest of the day and a great rest of 2023.
Well, thank you, Dr. Emmert. I'm very appreciative for the invitation, and I hope your listeners and viewers will benefit from some of the tips or the things we discussed today. Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you to everyone out there listening. We hope you have a wonderful 2023 as well. Thank you, everybody.